The murders have started again. John Perkins stood in the dark hallway with lights spilling across the tiles from the school's attached gym. The bright spot stopped short of his feet and made the rest of the hallway appear darker. Lockers lined both walls all the way to the um, first classroom doors that were locked across from each other. John had checked the handles on his way through the school. He couldn't see much further than that, but there wasn't much more to see along the sprawl of empty classes. From the gym, other colored lights flashed and spun, adding flavor to the spread of light on the floor. Music that was 3 decades old thundered out the open doors and through the empty school. John took a deep breath and entered the wall of noise. The scene inside was underwhelming. The music was too loud, even though John had graduated in the early 90s too. The music was too loud, and even though John had graduated in the early 90s too, he did not recognize the growling vocals coming through the speakers. The tones of unanswered angst still resonated somewhere in the back of his skull, where he kept his animalistic instincts and his love-hate relationship with grunge. The DJ bobbed his head from the small side stage near the folded bleachers, but looked distracted and bored. John did a quick count. There were only 17 alumni in the entire space, not counting himself, and why would he count himself? They should have been all that should have been all of them. He knew all their names and was keeping tabs on them. He could even tell where each one was staying, including the ones crashing with their folks and the ones who never left Fuller Beach in the first place. This was everyone he knew that should be here. Maybe that was a bad thing for his theory and in solving the most recent slayings. The small pocket of humanity on the scant floor had divided into 2 overlapping tribes. Tribe 1, the largest, were the drinkers. They had beers and harder stuff and were putting it away at a rate that made up for their low numbers. There shouldn't have been any drinking in the school, even for adults pushing into their 50s. John was the only law in the building, and he wasn't here to bust drinkers. The second tribe were the dancers. They moved with stiff joints and questionable dance skills. The drinking tribe was bleeding over into the dancers, making the whole scene more awkward by the moment. John was wrong. There was a third tribe of 1. She sat at one of the round tables near the back of the gym alone. There had to be almost as many tables as there were people. The organizers of this 30-year reunion for Fuller Beach High School had to be a little embarrassed. John moved to the table and called over the sounds like he's calling over someone, and that's not what I want to say, and spoke over the distorted guitar. "Do you have room for me, Addison?" She looked up at him, squinted, tilted her head, shook it, and waved at the seat next to her on her right. John accepted. Addison Carr asked, "What the hell are you doing here?" "It's good to see you, too. And your family?" "Doing great. Did you forget what high school you actually went to, John, or are you a very late transfer?" He smiled and acted like he was looking at the others dancing. "Just in town and decided to drop in." "Is your family still in Butler?" "No, they moved several years ago. Dad retired and they moved away from the beach instead of toward it." "And gave up all this." She waved a hand at the other 16 classmates. He laughed with genuine humor. "Hard to believe, isn't it?" "Are you still a state cop, John?" He met eyes with her and his smile felt less genuine. "I'm with the State Bureau." "Do I call you Officer Perkins or Agent Perkins?" "John is fine." "So you're not here on official business?" He scanned the crowd again and brought his attention back to her. Let me fix one typo there. "I'm here to bust these hellions for drinking on school grounds. The wagon is on its way to round you all up, including the DJ." "Good," she said. "That DJ is performing many crimes with each new song." She held up her cup that was clear and bubbling. "I'm only drinking Sprite, though, I'm afraid. Maybe I can turn informant for you." "I think we have enough evidence without your testimony," he said. "Only Sprite. What a bore. Are you still Southern Baptist?" "Not quite." She winked at him. "A couple more friends and you and I could have a church youth group reunion. It would probably blow the socks off this thing." I could try to get a beer away from them for you if you like, he said. I'm capable of supplying myself when I'm in the mood. I hate that they didn't plan this thing at a restaurant or club instead of the back of the gym, like at the 5-year reunion. Okay, hold on, let me fix this. There we go. Feels like a step backward, doesn't it? Every time I come back to town, it feels like going backwards, John. Yet you've made every reunion since the first one, right? How would you know such a thing, John? He smiled in a way that stretched his face muscles tight. He winked. You are a material witness in all these old people drinking and dancing. What case are you investigating, John? Fess up. We should use you for the interrogations. You're no nonsense. After a pause, in which an R&B song played to the groans of the drunk rednecks on the floor, Addison broke the silence. Is it the murders? He stared hard at her. Why would you think such a thing? Because they stopped shortly after we graduated, right? She asked. When he said nothing in response, she continued. Then they started up again 5 years later and lasted a few months. Then again at the 10-year mark, the 15, the 20, one weekend at 25 years, and now, right? That about sums it up, Addison. Have you been scrapbooking? She smiled and rolled her eyes. My parents are still in town, and there is no better gossip than a serial killer you guys can't catch. We should get your mom on the case then, John said. His eyes weren't leaving hers. I have to warn you, John, she's just as interested in church gossip, celebrity news, and Facebook conspiracy theories, I'm afraid. A rogue investigator, I see, he said. They are never as sexy as the TV makes them out to be, always causing us trouble. My mom just sends me chain letters in Messenger like she did when she first figured out email. We should lock them up instead. Addison took a sip of Sprite. They have Facebook jail for that sort of thing. So you were here about the murders, huh? I need to make this a contraction. Language sounds stilted in dialogue if you don't use contractions. John sighed and said, hard to say what is going on. Again, let's make that what's going on. Alright, can't be too hard. You found yourself in a room with a dozen or so people who are only here every 5 years, right? Tell me more, he leaned on the table. She narrowed her eyes. How do you know that it's not just unrelated killings? You know how this town is with the tourists and seasonal workers and runaways. The per capita murder rate here is higher than the big cities. More than a few local serial killers are sitting in the prison not far from here. Is that a fact, Addison? The per capita murders, I mean. Okay, continuing on here. I was just filling out the dialogue there a little bit. She shrugged and said, according to my mom, all those true crime Netflix shows have her as near an expert. Has her as a near expert at this point. John showed his teeth before he licked his lips and pulled his mouth into a line again. She's not wrong. There are some distinctions to these killings that set them apart, though. More than just the intervals between. The scalping, she said, and the drawings in blood. John sat for a moment. I just remembered something in that last story I needed to address, and I forgot to. About the girl that was possessed by the demon there. I needed to explain something that I threw in at the beginning, so I'll need to catch that in the editing. But that has nothing to do with this story. John sat for a moment as a tune from Michael Jackson's late career catalog came over the speakers. The crowd didn't protest, but many of them sat at the tables a little farther away from this pair. That, among other things, I suppose. Could be a copycat, she said. Still makes it murders, and the good folks of Rutledge County like us to solve those sorts of things before the 40-year reunion rolls around. Was there other stuff you guys kept back from the public that tell you these recent killings are like the others? He pulled his chair closer to her. She did not draw away, even in her body language. John pitched his voice a little lower. If you had to guess, Addison, what would you think those things were? How would I know, John? Only a few ways you could, really. Did your mom mention anything? I like the true crime Netflix shows, too. I know you guys keep some secrets for this reason. Well, if you have an idea of who I should be looking into, let me know. If you think it's one of these folks, you might look at who isn't in the room right now. John took his eyes off her finally, but brought them back quickly. Everyone appears to be here at the moment. She smiled wide and set her Sprite on the table. So you do think it's one of us. Is it possible it is one of us who came to town each of those years but didn't actually attend? Alright, that needs to be a question mark. We're in the home stretch here, so we'll be done with this in just a moment. We're keeping an eye out for lots of possibilities, he said. There are only so many folks who attended every reunion, especially now that we are down to this few. I attended every reunion, she said. Did you know that? No, he already said that. We'll say, but you knew that, right? I'll make a note of that now. No, let's just say I'll make a note of it. I'll make a note of it. I have to adjust the dialogue there because I forgot I already mentioned that at the beginning. Alright, you already knew that, John. Why bother pretending otherwise? Old habit, he said. If you let people keep talking, they eventually tell on themselves. You should get other people talking then besides just me. He shrugged. It's a small crowd. I have time. Yeah, having murders happen every time you come to town depresses turnout a little. That and everyone dying, John said. More from heart attacks. Let me change this forward to from. More from heart attacks than serial killers, I believe. You'd be surprised, Addison. Would I? Well, surprise me. It's been a dull night. His phone vibrated and he was going to ignore it, but he was here on business. John opened it up and scrolled through. His brow wrinkled. Is everything okay, John? He didn't answer, but shook his head and kept reading. Is it business or personal? She asked. He looked up as he put his phone away. They caught someone. She stared a moment and then tilted her head. The someone that pops up every 5 years? That someone? Don't know yet, but I have to go. Too bad. We were having such a time. Can I call you before you leave town? She actually snorted and said, Why don't you see if you got the right person first? I'd rather be cleared as a suspect before I consider seeing you. He smiled as he stood. Sorry for bothering you, Addison. Enjoy your evening. She rolled her eyes as he ran out of the gym. Addison took a couple more sips and slipped out into the darkness of her old school as well.